Update 37 is here today for the Elder Scrolls Online, and there are some major changes you need to know about, which will change your current builds for better or for worse, but mostly better. So let's start with what everyone wants to know. How are the new sets? As expected, the new sets you can obtain starting today range from underwhelming to extremely overpowered in certain situations and depending on your build. First, we have 8 new dungeon sets. These drop as part of the new DLC dungeon pack called Scribes of Fate, which comes to you for free if you subscribe to ESO Plus, or can be bought separately for crowns. This includes 2 light sets, 2 medium sets, 2 heavy sets, and 2 new monster sets. Starting with the light armor sets, we have Rightmaster's Bond and Runecarver's Blaze. Rightmaster is definitely an interesting concept for a healing set which creates a tether between you and an ally that can also proc minor heroism, and Runecarver's Blaze is a potential new meta DPS set, especially for classes like Necromancer and Dragonknight, who already have a substantial amount of powerful dots in their toolkit. For medium armor sets, we have Apocryphal Inspiration and Nyxhound's Howl. Apocryphal Inspiration is really not as useful from what I can tell, as the major buffs it provides are the same you can get through basic potions, and Nyxhound's Howl is an interesting option for a debuff set, as it gives easy access to Major Cowardice, reducing enemy weapon and spell damage by 430, while also giving you a Major Courage buff at the same time. This set looks great on paper, but my only problem is the uptime. Unless you build specifically for this by maxing out your weapon and spell damage, the best uptime you'll probably get will be around 50%, which, while still helpful, is a bit underwhelming for a full 5-piece set. For heavy armor sets, we have the Abyssal Brace and Telvanni Enforcer sets, which both center around a tank's block. Abyssal Brace is a niche tanking set that does provide a fairly unique buff, that being minor evasion, for you and the entire group, which may be helpful in some instances, while Telvanni Enforcer is a bit more selfish in nature, as it simply increases your own magicka recovery while blocking, and stamina recovery while not blocking. Finally, we do have 2 new monster sets available as well, which can be earned by completing the veteran modes of each dungeon. First, Azazan the Inferno is an interesting idea for healers, as it provides a unique armor buff which will stack with Major Resolve, since it isn't a named buff, it's just an armor value, as well as minor vitality thrown in, which is honestly pretty impressive. Araxa the Warped is pure recovery, which is a bit more lackluster, since recovery is so much easier to come by. And now, along with the 8 new dungeon sets, there are 3 new Rewards of the Worthy sets for PvP. This includes the light armor set Snake in the Stars, which was completely busted out the gate on PTS, but has since been pulled back a bit. This set deals oblivion damage to a target anytime they are healed, which, as you can imagine, would be pretty powerful in PvP. However, this is mitigated slightly more now that the set has a 12-second cooldown with a short 4-second duration. Also, the set cannot be applied multiple times to the same target. The medium PvP set is a perfect tank killer with tons of offensive penetration that stacks if your opponent is blocking. This would be a nice counter to permablock builds for sure. And finally, the heavy PvP set is Judgment of Akatosh and applies a massive snare and a stun after a short duration. However, there is some counter here, as apparently the main effects can be blocked. Moving on to combat changes as another huge part of this patch that you need to know about. One of the biggest combat changes has to do with yet more tweaking to light attack damage, specifically the increased scaling of all light attacks by 50% and werewolf light attacks by 20%. The team also introduced a stat scaling limit on these attacks, so they stop benefiting from weapon or spell damage and magicka or stamina after reaching 3,850 damage for weapons and about 4,800 for werewolf. What this essentially means is that for lower stat builds, your light attacks damage will be drastically improved, while for higher end builds, your light attacks may do pretty much the same or perhaps slightly less DPS overall due to that new capped value. From the developer's comment, the end result is that all light attacks will now scale much more aggressively with your stats, inflating their damage for non-optimized builds without changing their damage too much at the ceiling end. Some of the super optimized raid environments may lose 100 to 200 base damage on light attacks. Moving on, tanks got some very nice changes this patch, hopefully making the tank roll a bit easier, especially in more challenging encounters. The first change is that bar swapping no longer drops block, which is amazing. This is actually a great change for all players, in fact, as I'm sure many of us have died at some point thanks to bar swapping at the wrong time. Second is that abilities and item sets that pull a single target will now also attempt to taunt that target for 15 seconds if they're not already affected by another player taunt. This applies to things like Beckoning Armor from the Necromancer, Fiery Grip and Unrelenting Grip from the Dragonknight, Silver Leash from the Fighters Guild, and the Swarm Mother monster set. For clarification, we got the following dev comment. Now when you use these abilities against a target, it will check if the target is already taunted, and if not, it will taunt them. If they are already taunted, it will continue to pull the target and all of the other effects listed, but the taunt from the pool will not apply. They should help give more power of control to those who need to taunt targets, while simultaneously allowing non-tanks to still utilize these abilities without getting clobbered in situations such as the twins in Maw of Lorcash. So great changes all around there. Now, this patch had a few class changes implemented as well, and some of these will have a huge impact on specific classes, starting with the Dragonknight, who now get on-demand access to Major Berserk with the revised morph of Empowering Chains, which is now called Chains of Devastation. This morph now grants Major Berserk for 4 seconds after casting rather than Empower, as Molten Armaments already grants it in a more effective way. This is big, but as you'll see in a minute, DKs aren't the only class who can now easily access Major Berserk. Necros saw a nerf to Necro Bomb builds this patch in a few ways. First, the Grave Robber synergy of Boneyard got reduced by 34%, making it more in line with other damaging synergies. We also saw a big change to the Harmony trait, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is going to have even more impact on this specific playstyle. Now, Sorcerer saw some massive buffs and improvements in this patch, including my favorite change, a buff to the Hardened Ward damage shield. The developers increased the damage shield size of this morph by approximately 7% and increased the health cap to 72% up from 60%. The skill now also chooses to scale with your max magicka or your health, whichever value is higher. This means the shield is not only viable for magicka sorcerers anymore, but also extremely strong on both stamina sorcerer and sorcerer tanks. I've used this as a survival tool on my Stamsorc for solo gameplay and arenas, and can get huge shields with minimal effort, which is actually really nice. And Mage's Wrath, the Sorcerer Execute, now deals its execute damage to all targets nearby, rather than dealing an initial hit and a smaller amount of damage to nearby targets. This will result in approximately 129% damage increase for the area of effect damage portion. Onto weapon skill changes next, and the big one here you need to know about is Two-Handed Wrecking Blow, now getting the Major Berserk buff for 5 seconds after casting. I really like this change as it makes front bar two-hand build suddenly much more interesting in terms of maxing out that damage. You can also choose to slot Wrecking Blow as a main spammable, or simply use the skill once every 5 seconds or so to buff the rest of your skills with Major Berserk, and I really like this flexibility. And for you wall spammers out there, keep in mind that Wall of Elements and its morphs now apply Minor Breach to reduce enemy armor, and that Wall of Frost specifically will now snare enemies instead of immobilizing them. Vampires and Werewolves got some surprising changes in Update 37 as well, starting with Vampire and their completely reworked Mistform skill. This is, in my opinion, the most controversial change here this patch, as it does change the format of the skill completely. The Mistform and its morphs now teleport you to the position of your cursor up to a maximum of 15 meters away, and reduce your damage taken from the next 3 projectiles by 100% while teleporting. Casting any of these abilities will increase the cost of the ability by 33% for the next 4 seconds. And as far as the morphs go, Elusive Mist now grants Major Expedition and a Major Evasion for 4 seconds after the skill, and the Blood Mist morph now gives you a 20-second heal over time. Very big changes to that skill overall. The skill has been changed a lot in recent history. Let me know what you think about that one in the comment section down below. And along with that, Werewolf's got a few minor tweaks in that Howl of Despair now allows the caster to self-synergize with that Feeding Frenzy synergy. And what Feeding Frenzy will now do is it's now going to grant Minor Force and Empower for 10 seconds, rather than only Empower for 5 seconds. Now on paper, this sounds like a really great change for Werewolf, especially if you don't want to use the Oaken Soul Ring for those important buffs, but keep in mind that the cooldown on synergies in ESO is about 20 full seconds, which means you can only use Feeding Frenzy to get about a 50% uptime on those 2 important buffs while solo. Definitely a disappointing change, I think, for the soloists out there. Jewelry Glyphs and Jewelry Traits also got some important changes this patch, with one of my favorite changes being the update to Weapon and Spell Damage Glyphs. This is that Physical Harm and Glyphs of Spell Harm now grant both Weapon and Spell damage together, rather than only weapon or spell damage. They're still slightly different in that physical harm glyphs will now also add 10 stamina recovery at all qualities, and spell harm glyphs will add 10 magicka recovery at all qualities. Developer comment here states that in aims to continue our work on hybridization, we're merging these enchantments to grant hybrid stats. However, we want to still retain some semblance of differentiation with these glyphs, so we don't need to remove them from existence. This would actually cause a lot more problems than it seems, so we're adding some very small bonuses to each. This bonus will be small enough that you shouldn't feel the need to take one over the other, which if you're really trying to optimize, you can play around with either to get that extra bit of power. And like I said, I'm a big fan of this change and the continued pursuit of hybridization. This basically means that any damage-focused build can use either one of these glyphs, and it does not matter if you have things like, let's say, minor brutality from a Dragonknight or minor sorcery from a Templar in your group. Whatever damage glyph you have is going to scale perfectly with either one of those. And we mentioned Necro Bombers out there already talking about the graveyard change, but there is another change here that maybe hurts even more, and that's that the Harmony trait now grants up to 880 health magicka and stamina when you activate a synergy per trait, rather than increasing the healing, damage, or shielding potency of synergies by 20% per trait. That whole idea of the Necro, Harmony Bomber is basically going away this patch. In the developer comment, Zoss said that this trait is currently far too niche for its intended use and is meant to be an enhancer to the Undaunted skill line and group play, but ironically is being utilized more by solo builds in PvP to instantly obliterate large groups. So we're shifting this trait over to be more recovery focused, which has much more use potential between PvE and PvP, rather than trying to continue making a value that doesn't add more insta-gibbing potential, but still has enough impact in the PvE environment. So overall, I'm very excited for this patch and the potential options it's bringing to builds in Q1. I personally love the change to damage glyphs, to Wrecking Blow, as we mentioned, as well as the changes for tanks and sorcerers. Let me know what you think the biggest change is going to be for your build down in the comment section below. Also, a quick note here that we are still rolling out our members-only builds right here on YouTube, as you may have seen in the background, including this unique zero-class skills barbarian build that can be used for both solo and group content, and is great for literally any class in the game, since it only uses weapon skills, and especially the new buffed Wrecking Blow. This and many more unique builds are made exclusively for members of our Tier 2 Elite Squad, so if you'd like to support the channel and unlock some really great rewards like this, just click on that join button down below for more information. Huge shout out as always to our channel members that make HTM possible. Thanks to all of you for watching this video, and I'll see you around in the next one.